where terrorism, sadly, is a fact of life. We see the deaths on the TV at night and we hear that the perpetrator has been on a police watch list, yet these people are still free to cause death and destruction. I spoke with Middle East analyst and Vice President of the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, on not only the mindset of a terrorist, but why this is such a challenge for Western democracies like Australia. I want to start very much in a general terms. In easygoing countries like Australia, Western societies right across the board, I think we find it hard to believe that anyone would kill in the name of God. Can you explain to our listeners exactly what's in the terrorist mindset?
Well, absolutely. I think it's first important to note that you're really looking at a minority of the faith. It's probably, 20% or even less of the world's Muslims. But we have 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. That's a very significant number, 360-something million people who have a radical interpretation of the faith. Of course, not all of them are willing to carry out violence, but perhaps might see a religious struggle as something that they need to support. The numbers of people who would carry out that violence are extremely low, but they have been brainwashed in many cases. There are different strands and sects of the various Islamic ideologies where people have been taught from a very young age that violence is permissible in the name of God.
We've got this debate going on in Australia about, when do we call a terrorist event, and there's an argument we've become so consumed by determination, not to appear racist or against any particular religion that we now go out of our way to apologise for our intolerance or perceptions of intolerance, and we're certainly under pressure to report acts of terror as mental health issues. That's happening right around the world. How do we contend with that? How do we call it for what it is?
Well, I mean, I think we do need to have an honest conversation. There's been such a fear of insulting our friends and allies abroad, but of course we need to remember that the best way to show friendship is to be honest, to be respectful, but to be honest. And I think we need to continue to press the fact that this is a problem of radicalism within a certain part of the world. We don't hold the entire Muslim world responsible for what is happening, but it is a problem that is expanding within. In other words, it's sort of a virus that's within. We need to have them address the problem. At the end of the day, what I've long said is that we in the West cannot solve this problem. It is something for the Islamic community to do. And if we tiptoe around the problem as Western societies, we're never going to get to an answer.
You've been a counter-terrorism analyst in the United States. You've advised the Treasury Department. How much money is flowing from countries like Australia and particularly the West into terrorists in the Middle East? And are we doing enough to stop those money flows?
Well, I think, the good news is that countries like the United States, I think probably Australia, Canada, the UK, Western European countries have made their economies less hospitable over the years, really since 9/11. The terrorists don't like to park their money in Western banks because we're doing a better job of cracking down. What that means, however, is that you have a lot of people who are now engaging in trade-based money laundering, bulk cash smuggling, credit card fraud, doing a lot of things in the so-called black economy, right, underground economy. This is where we're seeing the money gravitate right now. And, of course, that's going to happen whether it's in the Arab world or here. We have crime everywhere, and it's hard to track.
And how much is, technological advances, how much is the internet behind this expansion of the financing of terrorism? We know a lot about how terrorist networks reach out to young people and radicalise them in their lounge rooms and bedrooms of ordinary Australian suburban homes. But give me an insight into how it works at the other end of the financing area.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, right now there's a lot of buzz around Bitcoin and blockchain technology. My organization, FDD, recently conducted a study. We found that a very small amount of money is being used through blockchain. But you also have to remember that there are other technologies like PayPal, online gambling sites that do make it a bit easier to launder money. And then, of course, also just remember that you can now use prepaid Visa cards. You can, you can use any number of technological advances to try to obscure your name or the origin of the money. So technology has certainly been a boost for the financial community, but it has also been a boost for the illicit financial community as well.
Some commentators say that the decline of the caliphate will mean a decline of terrorism in countries like ours. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, and I worry that organisations like ISIS just metastasise and reinvent themselves. And certainly over the years we've seen Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, Hamas, Hezbollah, Jama'ah, Islamist, Al-Shabaab, Abu Sayyaf, Al-Aqsa Martyrs, Boko Haram, Taliban. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. There's a myriad of organisations. They're a little bit different per Indigenous area that they're in, but virtually they're all united by Islam. So is this really a battle for the West? I mean, how many of us here in places like Australia actually understand what's at stake?
Look, I think that there is a real danger of Western complacency. I think that there's a certain fatigue that has set in, that the war on terror has been going on now for, almost 17 years, that we really haven't gotten very far, right? We're still having debates about how to define the enemy, let alone defeat it. We've been pushed out of certain wars, like the Iraq War, Afghanistan, with a sense that we can't win it. I think you're very right to point out that we are likely to see the metastasizing of ISIS. In fact, if you look at what happened with Al-Qaeda, what we saw after they were expelled from Afghanistan, from their so-called caliphate, what we saw was the creation of affiliate groups in countries around the world, international terrorist organizations with local grievances where fighters went home and began to carry out jihad in those host countries. We also saw, of course, the rise of cells in Western countries around the world, and attacks that resulted as well. So this is going to be a generational battle. I think we're actually probably toward the beginning of it, and it will require a certain amount of resolve on the part of Western countries and governments alike.
Well, I think we are at the start of it, unfortunately. I think this is the generational fight, certainly of our age, of my age. Here in Australia and elsewhere too, any attempt we have to debate these issues where there is, clear and demonstrable relationship between terror and Islam is pretty much shut down with claims of Islamophobia. Now, the sad truth is that while there's many Muslims, obviously, who are not terrorists, most terrorists are Muslim. How can we have an honest discussion in the West about these issues, about the causal relationship between the doctrine of Islam and terror?
Well, I think the good news is that we have started to have some of those conversations. If you look in Saudi Arabia right now, which has been the #1 exporter of Wahhabi ideology, there is something of a revolution going on in that country, that the new crown prince is trying to make the country there a bit more modern. He's trying to crack down on the radicalism in the country. What we need to do is we need to encourage that, but also start to encourage them to crack down on the export of Wahhabism, because as we know, the Saudis have tentacles across the world with the so-called madrasas, these religious schools that have been incubators of terrorism worldwide. I think there's progress there. I think we need to build on that progress. We also need to speak to countries like Qatar and Turkey, which are proponents of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, maybe not overtly supporting Al-Qaeda or ISIS. In some cases they do, in some cases they don't. But we have to stop calling them allies when any of these countries, when they engage in extremist ideology and they oppose the West in the way that they do. So this is about honesty. It's about honesty at a local level in terms of having a conversation really at a grassroots where we talk about the different communities and whether they're welcome in the West. Of course, if they're nonviolent, they should be. But it's also about international relations, and I have seen a reticence on the part of the West to engage in some of the more problematic countries to call them out for the behavior that we still see 17 years on into the war on terror.
Just a point, I want to pick up on something you said there. I mean, is there a point that we say no to particular countries in terms of immigration to the West? I mean, are there countries that have no intention of, and certainly their people have no intention of immigrating and settling into Western countries and Western values?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an interesting question, and it's one, obviously, that we're struggling with in the United States. President Trump has been, wrestling with an immigration policy, and it's been controversial, to put it mildly. What I would say, though, is that in some cases, we have a lot of people who are trying to get out of these countries that are repressive, that are religious societies that don't afford women's rights or don't afford people the choice to be able to choose if they want to be religious. So Iran, for example, obviously we have a lot of problems with the Iranian regime, but the people there appear to be more pro-West than in other places around the world. So, I think there is a danger in cutting them off from immigration. I think the important thing here is to have a reliable vetting process. This has been, I think, what has been missing across the board, that if people want to immigrate, we need to make sure that we understand where they came from. We need to understand if they have a criminal record. We need to understand if there are sort of black holes in their history. If we can't see where they were for several years, there's a possibility that they might have been fighting in Afghanistan or Syria. These are things that we need to work out now, and I think we're going to be struggling with this as well as we also try to wrestle with the question of ideology itself.
Dr. Schanzer, thank you very much for your time. I know you've got other commitments while you're in Australia, and I have to say, common sense has been trumped, I think, by too much goodwill from the West for some time, and hopefully your work and the work of your foundation will bring common sense to the fore yet again. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.